Parasitoid wasps, also known as parasitic wasps, are some of the most hardcore creatures in the insect world. And while the adults feed on pollen and nectar, the way they become adults in the first place is a little darker. The eggs are laid on or in the bodies of other insects, and the larva starts to grow as it feeds on the host insect. But overall, the parasitic wasp plays an important part of the ecosystem, and they really are nature's pest control. So there's a lot of cool stuff to be seen in the strange world of these flying parasites. And I've only caught a handful of them on camera, so let's go through my finds from most recent to oldest, and then we'll look at some more species after. So first up, we got this ichneumon wasp. I don't have an exact ID on it. Also, again, we're going from most recent to oldest, which works out pretty good, because my oldest finds, my first finds, are probably some of the cooler ones. So next up, we got this blue cuckoo wasp from the genus Chrysis. Very cool colors on them, very metallic looking. And they are kleptoparasitic, I believe, which means they let their larvae freeload off of other wasps, basically. Next up, another non-exact ID. This is just some type of spider wasp. It was very hard to film, so these are just crappy screenshots. But yeah, pretty cool to see carrying the spider all the way to its nest. Next, we have this blue mud dauber. I think most people are probably familiar with mud daubers. You know, they make these mud nests. Usually see them outside of houses or buildings. But yeah, I found this in my house actually, so I just caught it and let it go. So now we have a couple nomad bees, which yes, they are bees, but I figured I'd throw them in there too because they're basically in the same boat as cuckoo wasps. They got the kleptoparasitic thing going on. But it's really cool though. They got these special senses to determine if the nest is provisioned with pollen, if a host bee is nearby or in the nest, or if the nest has been parasitized before. So they have special senses to really help them find a good nest to steal from. So here we have a pair of cicada killers, which they're a pretty popular species. I think a lot of people are familiar with cicada killers. But yeah, terrible terrible picture, so I got some additional photos in here. But for me, they're a personal favorite, so always nice to see those. Next up, we have Limian orbis, or Limian orbis. Small species, but pretty cool looking. And from what I read, they parasitize Microlepidoptera, so mini moths, basically, which is what I assume it's doing here, is getting a moth egg case. So now we finally reached my very first parasitoid wasp find, the American pelicinid wasp. I found this while I was camping. Very cool looking, kind of like a scorpion looking tail. And they parasitize June beetles. But yeah, very cool species. So now that we've seen what I've been able to find here in New York, let's take a look at what's lurking in other parts of the world with this top 8 coolest species list. Coming in at number 8, we go to Costa Rica for Dendroceras scutularis, which is a pretty new species. I think it was discovered in 2018, and they use those spines on their back to saw out of their host. And they have those feather-like antennae, which are pretty cool. And it's also worth noting they're about the size of a sesame seed, so very small. Coming in at number 7, we have a tie between cicada killers and tarantula hawks. And I'm just going with the genus for both of these because there's a ton of different cicada killers, a ton of different tarantula hawks, and they're all relatively the same and basically do the same thing. But I like cicada killers better personally, but tarantula hawks do have a much worse sting. Either way though, I think just due to their size, I think both of these deserve a mention. At number 6, we have cockroach wasps, and most people are familiar with the emerald cockroach wasp, Ampulex compressa, but really the whole Ampulex genus is pretty similar, and they have the famous mind control venom that interferes with the cockroach's escape reflexes, and then they, of course, lead the cockroach to their burrow, and then their babies will feed on the roach and live inside of it for a while, actually. Consume its internal organs and eventually they will emerge as an adult. For number 5, I'm going with the Godzilla wasp, Microgaster godzilla. So not only does this have a cool name, but it also has a very cool ability to dive into the water to parasitize the Elaphila species of moth that are actually aquatic caterpillars in their caterpillar stage. And they make these little plant cases that float on the water. And then when the caterpillar extends out of the case to feed, that's when the Godzilla wasp makes its move. At number 4, we have the eucaryotid wasp. Now, eucaryotids are a very small species, and they are specialized parasites of ants, meaning that only one species per genus of ant, usually. And the way they get them in the first place is the ants themselves actually bring the larvae into their nest. So it's pretty interesting. And they also look pretty cool. At number 3, we got conure wasps, one of my favorites. And I personally like this black and red one the best, but there's a whole bunch of different kinds, and they all have these giant hind legs, which are kind of cool looking. And one species is reported to use those legs to hold the mouth of antlions open so they can inject eggs into its throat, which is pretty messed up. But they're pretty cool, and they are mainly a South American type of species, but you can find some of them in Florida as well. At number 2, we have a genus that I thought at first was overrated, velvet ants. And yes, they are wasps, not ants. The females don't have wings, the males have wings. One interesting fact that I found was that they sometimes parasitize cicada killers, which I thought was kind of interesting given the size difference. But why did I put them at number 2? And are they overrated? Well, no, they are definitely not overrated. This article, which I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's extremely long, this article totally changed my mind on velvet ants. So this research paper goes over some experiments that they did, some pretty extensive experiments actually, where they took a whole bunch of different natural predators that velvet ants would face in the wild and put them against velvet ants to see how they would react. So again, this paper is very, very long, but the part on toads is probably the most interesting part. In fact, toads, I think, were the only species or the only animal that basically could be a natural predator for velvet ants. So only one toad was actually able to consume a velvet ant, and it was stung in the process, and then 26 minutes later, its breathing totally ceased and they thought it was dead. But the toad did actually survive. Some of the other predators, though, were not as fortunate. In fact, one of the lizards actually died 24 hours later after its encounter with the velvet ant. So even though they look soft and fuzzy, velvet ants are pretty much indestructible in their world. The study showed that out of over 100 interactions between potential predators and various species of velvet ant, there were only 16 occasions where feeding strikes occurred, and only 4 velvet ants were eaten, 3 of which were immediately regurgitated, and only 1 velvet ant was consumed successfully and retained by a predator. So with their extremely hard exoskeleton, warning sounds, warning colors, and warning chemical secretion, and their incredibly bad sting, I think velvet ants deserve to be pretty high up on the list. And finally, at number 1, we have the giant ichneumon wasp, or the genus Megarhyssa. And these are a personal favorite of mine, mainly just for how they look. They have one of, if not the longest, ovipositor of any wasp. And they're a parasite of the horntail wasp, which is actually a type of sawfly. The adult horntail females introduce a wood-digesting fungi when laying their eggs, and this helps their babies extract food value while feeding on the wood. The giant ichneumon wasp is able to detect the odor of this fungi, so when they land on the tree, they're able to walk along the surface and pinpoint exactly where the horntail grubs are within the wood of that tree. And that's when they use their extremely long ovipositor to lay their eggs. And they do a good job of controlling horntail populations. In fact, in some countries, they use them as a biological control agent. Another thing I like about these guys is that when you find one, you can sometimes find multiple others at the same spot, and you can even find other species of giant ichneumon wasps at that same spot too. So yeah, that's my number 1 parasitoid wasp. So that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you liked it. If you'd like to see other types of bugs on this channel, let me know in the comments. And I do have 2 other videos in the works at the moment. It's just taking me a while to edit them. So stay tuned for those, and until next time, peace.